My name is Faith Twyford, and when I was 17, my family moved 2 states away without telling me. I came home from my diner shift on a Tuesday night in March, turned my key in the same sticky lock I'd been fighting since 8th grade, and stepped into a house with no furniture, no photographs, and no people in it. On the kitchen counter, under a magnet shaped like a cardinal, my mom had left one torn-off note from her grocery pad. It said, "You'll figure it out." No address, no phone call, no explanation for why my family packed a truck while I was pouring coffee for strangers. It took me 12 years to build a life out of what they left behind. Then one article with my face in it brought them back to my door, and what my mother did next was worse than the note. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where women tell the stories their families hoped they would keep quiet. Stories about betrayal, boundaries, and finding the people who actually stay. If you have ever been the strong one nobody checked on, this story is for you. Drop a comment, tell me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe, because you will want to hear how this ends. I stood in the doorway for a long time before I could make myself walk through my own house. The living room carpet still held the dents where the couch had been, 4 little dimples in a rectangle, like the room was remembering furniture that had already crossed a state line. The television was gone. The recliner was gone. The wall going up the stairs was a line of pale rectangles where the family pictures used to hang, and I remember touching one of those clean spots like it might still be warm. They took the photo of Caleb in his football uniform. They took the one of my parents at Niagara Falls. The only frame left in the house was face down on the hallway floor, and when I turned it over, it was my school portrait from junior year. Just mine. Upstairs, my room was untouched, my bed made, my clothes hanging exactly where I'd left them that morning, and that detail scared me more than the empty rooms did because it meant somebody had packed around me. Somebody had carried boxes past my door and decided what I'd need. I went back down to the kitchen and read the note again under the cardinal magnet. "You'll figure it out." My mom's grocery pad, the one with the sunflowers on the border. I called her cell phone standing right there at the counter. It rang 4 times, then voicemail. I called again. 2 rings, voicemail. The 3rd time it went straight to that flat robot voice, and I understood, at 17 years old, holding a note in a kitchen that still smelled like our last dinner, that my mother had just watched my name light up her phone and press decline. Then somebody knocked on the front door, hard. It was Mr. Hollis, the landlord, holding a folder and looking embarrassed to be alive. He said my dad had called him that morning to close out the lease. Rent was paid through the end of June, and my parents had told him I'd be staying with relatives until school let out. Relatives. I stood there in my diner apron, smelling like burnt coffee, while a grown man explained my own life to me, and I did the thing I would spend years learning not to do. I said I was fine. After he left, I called the police because I want that on the record. People hear this story and think I just curled up and took it, and I did not. A young officer came out, took one look around, and got quiet the way people do when the rules and the right thing aren't the same shape. I was 17 years and 9 months old. The rent was paid. There was food in the pantry, technically, if you count crackers and a jar of pickles. He said the words, "not technically abandonment," to me in my own kitchen, and to his credit, he looked sick saying them. He offered to call Children's Services, and I said, "Okay," and they promised a callback, because a girl with a job and a roof and 90 days until her birthday is nobody's emergency. That night, I slept in my own bed in an empty house, listening to the furnace click, and my last thought before I went under was a question that would take me 12 years to stop asking. What did I do? In the morning, I checked the garage and it was empty too, except for one piece of paper taped to the wall where my dad's toolbox used to sit. To make sense of that piece of paper, I have to back up 2 years. My dad, Dale, spent 26 years as a machinist at the plant in Maple Glen, Ohio, and when the plant closed, it closed the way a heart stops, with the whole town standing around it. He was 47 and suddenly worth $11 an hour at the hardware store. My brother Caleb was the family's good news back then. 18, handsome, a knee like a hinge made by God, until a bad tackle tore it apart his freshman year of college. Surgery, then pills for the pain, then pills for the pills. By the time I was 16, I knew what it meant when Caleb's music was too loud, and I knew which of my mom's smiles was real and which one was for the neighbors. I was working at the Copper Kettle by then, saving tips in a shoebox in my closet, a roll of bills I counted every Sunday like some girls said prayers. $1,900 for a car, for college applications, for a life. One Sunday morning, the shoebox weighed nothing. I stood in the kitchen shaking and I told my mom, and here is the part people never believe. She didn't deny it, didn't even flinch. She kept wiping the counter and said, "Your brother is drowning, Faith." Like it was a weather report. Like the money had simply flowed downhill to the person who needed it, the way everything in our house flowed downhill toward Caleb, and my job was to stand on dry ground and be glad I could swim. I was 16 years old, and that was the morning I learned the family math. There were children who got saved, and there were children who did the saving, and my mother had decided which one I was before I was old enough to vote. Here's what I need you to understand about the weeks before they left, because for years I put myself on trial for missing it. I didn't miss it. 6 weeks before that Tuesday, boxes started stacking up in the garage, taped and labeled in my mom's church bulletin handwriting. I asked her about them straight out, at the dinner table, in front of everybody. She smiled and said the church was collecting for a spring yard sale, honey, and did I want to donate my old winter coat. Caleb disappeared for days at a stretch that February, and when I asked, it was a program through the church, a retreat, a men's group. My mom started taking phone calls in the backyard with the door shut behind her, standing by the frozen tomato beds in her house slippers. I asked her a second time, flat out, who she kept talking to. She looked me right in the eye and said, "Aunt Ro, baby," her hips acting up. She lied to me the way you'd iron a tablecloth, smooth, patient, no wrinkles left for me to grab. Understand? I was a 17-year-old with a curfew and a W-2, asking direct questions and getting fed answers by the two adults who had legal custody of my whole existence. There's no detective work that beats your own mother's face. The piece of paper in the garage, the one taped where the toolbox used to be, was a receipt from Maple Glen Storage, Unit 118, 6 months paid in advance, made out in my dad's name. At the time, I thought it was trash they'd forgotten. It would take me a long time to do the math on the date printed at the top, because that receipt was from January. They had rented their getaway storage before Valentine's Day. I lasted in that house until the end of June, working doubles through the spring, and when the lease ran out, I had $400, 2 duffel bags, and nowhere legal to be. So I rode my bike 2 miles in the rain to Maple Glen Storage, because Unit 118 was the only thing on earth with my family's name on it that hadn't left town. The receipt was still good. The unit was 10 feet by 10 feet, and when I rolled up that door, I met everything my family hadn't wanted. The old brown couch with the burn hole. Boxes marked Christmas in my mom's handwriting. My dad's broken shop fan. A folding lawn chair. They took the family and they left me the things they didn't want. And I want to tell you, I saw the poetry in that right away. But mostly, I just got out of the rain. I slept that first night on the brown couch, under my own winter coat, the one my mom had tried to donate, surrounded by the leftovers of people who were 2 states away and not answering their phones. Before I slept, I did one small thing that turned out to matter. I took the note, "You'll figure it out," and the storage receipt, and I put them in an empty Folgers coffee can I found in a box, and I set the can on top of a filing cabinet like an urn. Then I clipped the little brass key for Unit 118 onto my keyring, next to the key for a house that wasn't mine anymore. That brass key stayed on my ring for the next 12 years. I wish I could tell you 17-year-old me knew why. Around midnight, a flashlight beam swept across the bottom of the door and stopped. The door rolled up 4 feet and stopped, and a man in a Carhartt jacket stood there with his flashlight pointed politely at the floor. Earl Dobbins, the property manager, 60-something, a face like a catcher's mitt. He looked at me, at the couch, at the 2 duffel bags, and I watched him do arithmetic no kid should be on the wrong side of. Then he said, and I remember it word for word, "Camera on this row's been broke since fall. Real shame." He told me the gate code changed the first of the month. He said folks who got to their units before 7 in the morning generally weren't seen by anybody, and that fire code meant no hot plates, no candles, no exceptions. And then he rolled my door back down and walked away, like we'd discussed the weather. The next morning, there was an army blanket and a good flashlight sitting outside Unit 118. No note. Some people rescue you loud. Earl rescued me at a volume only I could hear. The county did eventually call back that summer, a tired, kind woman who laid out my one official option. There was a foster placement with a bed open, 2 counties over. 2 counties meant a new high school 3 months before graduation, and my whole college plan was riding on a state scholarship that required me to finish where I'd started, with the GPA and the counselor who knew my file. I said no thank you, and I understand if that sounds crazy, but I'd already lost my family that year, and I wasn't going to lose the one thing with my own name on it. There was one more door, and it was held open by a woman named Ms. Pruitt, and I owe her more than I can fit in this story. Ms. Pruitt was the guidance counselor at Maple Glen High, and when I finally told her the truth that April, she didn't gasp or cry or make me manage her feelings. She pulled a form out of a drawer like she'd been waiting. There's a federal law, McKinney-Vento, for students without a fixed address, and under it an unaccompanied kid can stay enrolled, no guardian signature required. She got me a locker by the gym showers, a bus pass, and a fee waiver for every college application, and she never once made me feel like a project. I graduated that June with honors and a scholarship, in a gown that hid how loose my clothes had gotten. Every senior got 4 guest tickets, and I'd set aside 2 seats in my head anyway, out of some stubborn animal hope. I walked across that stage and looked out at 2 empty chairs, and the only sound for me in that whole gymnasium was Ms. Pruitt, up in the faculty row, clapping with her hands over her head. 3 weeks later, a postcard showed up at the storage office with a Tennessee postmark and no return address. Hope school finished up okay. You'll figure it out. Love, Mom. She spent a stamp to say it twice. I sat on the brown couch and understood something with a clarity that felt almost peaceful. It had cost them nothing to leave me. That was the point of making me strong. I put the postcard in the Folgers can with the note, and I stopped looking at the road for their truck. The next time I heard my mother's voice, I was 29 years old. Let me compress 4 years the way you'd wring out a mop. I lived in Unit 118 for 15 months altogether, then a room above a laundromat that shook like an airplane but had a real shower. Days at the Copper Kettle, nights cleaning offices for a janitorial outfit out of Columbus, business classes at the community college where the state scholarship stretched furthest, Tuesdays and Thursdays, with highlighters I stole back from my own lost and found. I got good at a very specific thing during those years. I got good at being nobody's problem. When I was 19, my appendix tried to kill me on a Wednesday night, and I drove myself to the emergency room with my seatbelt cinched against the pain like a corset. The intake lady asked for my emergency contact, and I looked at that little box on the form and wrote ANA, and she looked at the box, then at me, 1 beat too long, the way Earl had. I told myself it was independence. It took a therapist a decade to help me call it by its real name, but we'll get there. Here's what I noticed instead: mopping law offices at 2 in the morning while my classmates were at parties. I was good at this. Not just willing. Good. I could walk into a wrecked room, a flooded break room, a fire-damaged file wall, and see the order underneath the mess. See the 11 steps between disaster and normal. I'd been training for it my whole life, cleaning up after people who never once looked back to say thank you. One night, I pulled a flyer off a corkboard about a county surplus auction, vehicles sold as is, cash only, and I folded it into my pocket next to my paycheck. The van was a white Ford with 190,000 miles on it, a dent shaped like Florida in the sliding door, and a smell I chose to interpret as character. I was 22. I bid $3,100. Which was every dollar I had after 4 years of saying no to myself, and when the auctioneer pointed at me, I threw up a little in my mouth and raised my hand higher. That night, in the laundromat parking lot, I laid out stick-on letters under a streetlight and named my company, Bright Line Cleaning. I'd read the word in a business class handout, a bright line, a boundary you do not cross, and something in me picked it off the page like a splinter picking itself. The decal went on crooked, about 2 degrees uphill, and I left it because straightening it meant peeling it, and I had exactly one set of letters. My first client was a dentist's office where I'd been the night janitor, and Dr. Feld took a chance on the girl with the crooked van because, he said, I was the only cleaner he'd ever had who left the supply closet better than she found it. I did move-outs, flooded basements, the jobs with mold and smells that made grown men tap out. I showed up early, priced honest, and worked like a woman with no net. Because that's what I was. Year 1, it was me in the van. Year 3, me and 2 part-timers. The reviews said the same thing over and over. Shows up, tells the truth, cleans like she's mad at the dirt. Then a woman walked into my 2-desk office, dropped a resume on the counter, and said my ad was terrible but my reviews were honest. Dana Whitfield was 30 when I hired her and had a tongue like a box cutter and a heart like a casserole. And within 2 years she was my operations manager and the closest thing to a sister I've ever had. She's the one who turned Brightline from me plus helpers into a company, with schedules and benefits and a real payroll service. She's also the one who started Thanksgiving. Our first November with actual employees, she found out that 6 of our people had nowhere to go, and she showed up at the shop with a supermarket rotisserie chicken, a can opener, and 0 shame. We ate off paper plates on the break room table with the good bleach smell still in the air, and I looked around at my dispatcher and my 2 newest hires, and Dana licking cranberry sauce off a plastic fork, and I felt something in my chest unclench that had been clenched since I was 17. It became the rule. Every year, the break room, paper plates, anybody with nowhere to be. When I was 27, I bought a little brick house in Columbus with a kitchen that got the morning light, and the night I signed, I sat on the floor of that empty kitchen and cried for the first time in 10 years. And the strange part is why. The emptiness didn't scare me anymore. Houses empty out sometimes, and I needed to know I could stand in one and stay. Let me pause here because I know some of you are sitting with your own version of this. If you ever built a Thanksgiving out of coworkers and paper plates because your own family forgot your address, tell me about it in the comments, because I read everyone, and there are more of us than anybody admits. And if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe now. Believe me, you want to be here for what's coming, because this is the part of my life where things were finally good, steady, boring even, in the way I'd prayed for boring my whole childhood. And then a water pipe burst on the 4th floor of a children's hospital. And the article about what we did next found its way to Tennessee. It happened in January, the year I was 29. A main ruptured overnight above a pediatric wing in Columbus, and by dawn there was an inch of water sitting in rooms where kids with IV poles were supposed to be sleeping. Their facilities director called 3 companies. 2 said Monday. We said now. My crews worked in rotations for 3 days straight, extractors and air movers running around the clock, and I was in there with them in rubber boots. Because I don't ask my people to do anything I won't do. We got that wing dried, treated, and cleared for patients in 11 days. The hospital sent a thank you letter. The Columbus Business Journal sent a reporter. The piece ran in February with a photo of me standing next to the crooked decal van, which I still keep in the fleet out of loyalty, and the headline called Brightline a 7-figure restoration firm, which was technically true and made me squirm anyway. The reporter asked how a woman who started with one auction van learned to run toward disasters, and I gave her the quote I'd give my own reflection. I said, I learned to work like this back when I had nobody. I didn't say more, and she didn't push. The article went up on the Journal's website on a Thursday. By Saturday it was getting passed around Maple Glen community pages on Facebook, Hometown Girl Makes Good, and somebody tagged somebody who tagged somebody. Sunday night, I was eating soup at my kitchen counter when my phone buzzed with a notification, a new comment on the article from a name I hadn't seen in 12 years. Carol Twyford. So proud of my daughter, with a little red heart. I sat there while my soup went cold, reading that one little comment like a bomb tech. The call came the following Tuesday, a number with a Tennessee area code, and I answered it standing in my office with the door open, which was a mistake, because Dana saw my face change from across the hall. "There's my girl," she said. That was the opener. 12 years, and my mother came in like a commercial break, bright, warm, rehearsed. She talked for 4 straight minutes, and I can give you the whole script. Wasn't that article something? Aunt Ro had sent it to her. She'd always known, always told everybody, that her faith was going to do something big. "Your daddy's heart is acting up, sweetheart. They've got him on a list for a surgery down here. Caleb's doing so good now, you'd be so proud of your brother." Nothing shaped like an apology. Not one question about the 12 years, where I'd slept, how I'd eaten, who I'd become. The past was a room she walked past like it had a smell, and then she said the thing she'd probably been polishing all weekend. "We always knew you'd figure it out, honey. Look at you now. We made you strong. I want you to sit with that the way I had to." The note she left on the counter when she abandoned her 17-year-old had been promoted, over 12 years, into her proudest accomplishment. The wound had been reissued as a diploma, with her name on the bottom as the school. I said, "I have a meeting, Mom," which was the first lie I'd told in years, and she was still talking when I lowered the phone. Something about how family should stick together now that. I didn't block the number. I stood there a long time trying to understand why I didn't block the number, and I didn't like any of my answers. That night, I got in my truck and drove an hour east in the dark, to the only address that had never lied to me. Here is something I never told anybody until Dana pried it out of me last year. I never gave up Unit 118. 12 years, and the first business day of every month, Maple Glen Storage drew its little fee out of my account like a tithe. The couch went to charity years ago. The Christmas boxes, the fan, all gone. What was left, when I rolled that door up at 9 o'clock that night, was a 10 by 10 concrete room, one folding lawn chair, and a Folgers coffee can sitting on top of a filing cabinet. I sat down in the lawn chair in my coat and let the cold come up through my boots. And I looked at that can, the way you'd look at a headstone. The note was in there. The postcard was in there. The receipt from January was in there. I'd been paying rent for 12 years on the worst thing that ever happened to me, keeping it climate-controlled, keeping it safe, and sitting in that chair, I finally asked myself who exactly the storage was for. So I did 2 things from that lawn chair, and they were the start of everything that came after. First, I took out my phone, and I texted my mother one question, the only one that mattered, and I made it plain. "Why did you leave me?" I watched the dots appear and disappear twice. Then her answer came through, and it was this: "Let's not dwell on the past, sweetheart. Family looks forward." I read that answer maybe 30 times, and it told me more truth than she'd told me in a decade, because a person who has a good answer gives it to you. Second, I called the storage office voicemail and gave my notice on Unit 118 end of the year. I said out loud, alone in a concrete box, "I'm done paying rent on the past." Then my phone lit up in my hand. "Dana. Faith. There are people in the lobby asking for you. They say they're your parents." It was Monday morning, not even 10 o'clock, and they were in my lobby, which meant they'd left Tennessee before dawn or slept at a motel nearby, and either answer told me this was a campaign, not a visit. I saw my dad first, and I'm not going to lie to you about what that did to me. 12 years had gone through Dale Twyford like water through a paper bag. He was thin in the neck and gray in the lips, leaning on a cane by the front window, reading our safety certifications on the wall like scripture. My mother was at the reception desk in her church coat, telling my 23-year-old receptionist the whole saga, our daughter, this whole company. Can you believe it? We're just so proud. And when she saw me, she came across that lobby with her arms wide and gathered me up like the ending of a movie, and I stood there inside that hug feeling my own employees watching, feeling the hug being performed at them, not given to me. I took my parents into the glass conference room, the one where every wall is a window, and I did that on purpose. Whatever happened in there was going to happen in daylight, in front of witnesses, because I had learned some things about my mother in the first 17 years. She admired everything expensive and nothing true. "All this, from our girl," she kept saying, touching the table like a realtor. My dad said one sentence the whole first 10 minutes. He said, "Your mother said you'd want to see us." Quiet, like an apology trying to be born, and she talked over the end of it. Then she reached into her tote bag and set a folder on my conference table. Thick, dog-eared, with a hospital's name printed across the top. Cardiology consults, an estimate for a valve surgery, statements with balances circled in blue pen. Dale needed the operation. That part was real. I want to be fair about what was real. They were underinsured, behind on the deductible, and the hospital in Tennessee wanted a plan before scheduling. I read every page while my mother narrated, and then she slid the folder aside like Act 1 of a play and brought out Act 2. Their landlord was selling the house they rented. There was a sweet little place 2 streets over. And honey, with your name next to ours on a mortgage, the bank would just sing. She actually said that. The bank would sing. And then she folded her hands on my conference table, looked at me with her head tilted at the exact angle I remembered from church, and said the sentence she had driven 6 hours to say. "Family takes care of family, Faith." I looked at her for a moment, and then I asked the only question I had left in inventory. Where was family when I was sleeping in a storage unit? And my mother blinked, twice, and said, "A what?" She didn't know. 12 years, and it had never once occurred to her to wonder where the furnitureless 17-year-old had slept, because the note had already settled it. I'd figured it out. Therefore, it had all worked out. Therefore, there was nothing to know. The abandonment didn't end in 2014. It just kept running quietly in the background like a pump, and I was looking at the proof. I stood up, thanked them for the drive, and said I needed time to think. At the door, my mother pressed an envelope into my hand, soft with handling, and said, "Read it tonight, baby. It's everything we need." That night, I called my Aunt Ro, my mother's older sister, the one soul from my bloodline who'd acted like I existed after 2014. She's the one who used to leave grocery bags on the storage office step with Earl that first winter, canned soup and pilot bread, and one time a birthday card with a 20 in it. When I said Mom and Dad had shown up at my company, Ro went quiet in a way that had shape to it, and then, 63 years old and tired of carrying other people's secrets, she started handing them to me. The move wasn't panic. That was the word I'd used for it all those years. Some emergency. Some midnight decision. Ro said Carol had filed the mail forwarding in January. She'd requested their church records transferred to a congregation in Tennessee in January. The yard sale story, the backyard phone calls, all of it staged across 2 months, while I asked direct questions at the dinner table. And then, Ro said the part she'd sworn on a Bible to keep, which is that she'd known 1 week before it happened. Carol made her swear. And when Ro fought her on it, my mother said, and Ro repeated it slow, like handing me something sharp handle first, "Faith lands on her feet. She'll be fine. It'll be the making of her." She made it sound almost kind, Ro said. "That's the thing about your mama. She can make a fire sound like a heating plan." I thanked her, and I meant it. And I was reaching to hang up when Ro said one more thing. "Faithy, wait. There's something else been sitting on me. The note they left you." I said, "What about it?" She said, "Honey, that wasn't your mama's handwriting." I opened my mother's envelope at the kitchen table with my coat still on. It wasn't a letter. It was a mortgage co-signer application, printed out, filled in, with my legal name typed into the borrower fields, and a bank deadline circled in the same blue pen from the hospital folder. She'd completed my sections. Employer, Brightline Restoration and Cleaning. Relationship to borrower, daughter. All I was meant to add was a signature and 12 years of amnesia. I set it down and I went and got the Folgers can, because it lives at my house now. I'd taken it home from the unit that night at the storage facility. I took out the note, "You'll figure it out," and I laid it on the table next to an old birthday card, one of the few things of Caleb's that had knocked around in those Christmas boxes, "Happy 12th birthday, Faithy, from your big brother." And there it was. once you knew to look. The tilt. The little left-leaning slant. The way the crossbar on the T sails past the letter like it's leaving town early. My mother had all the words 12 years ago. I never doubted the words were hers. But the pen had been in my brother's hand. Caleb wrote it. 19 years old, wrecked on pills, packing a truck to flee the state. And the last chore anybody did in that house was my big brother writing me goodbye in one torn-off line because our parents wouldn't hold the pen. I sat with that for 3 days and didn't tell a soul. On the 4th day, an envelope came to my office with a Tennessee postmark and the same handwriting, and the first line said, "I wrote the note. You deserve to know that before anything else." I read my brother's letter standing up, then sitting down, then out loud to my empty kitchen, because some documents you have to hear in a human voice, even your own. He didn't open with excuses. He opened with the pen. Mom dictated it. He wrote, standing at the counter with her coat already on, and Dad was in the truck, because neither of them could make their hands do it, and I was 19 and high, and I told myself it was a kindness, leaving you something instead of nothing. Then he laid the whole year out flat, no varnish. The knee, the pills, the money he owed to people in Ohio who did not send invoices, the church program in Tennessee that had a bed open and cost next to nothing. And the part that put me on the floor of my own kitchen. Your college fund was gone by Christmas, Faith. They drained it for my first rehab, the one that didn't take. Months before they left, the future they owed me had already been quietly liquidated and spent on him. He wrote, "Mom said you were the only one of us who'd survive it." I told myself that too, because it made it easier to live with what we did. It took me most of 7 years sober to stop believing it, because here's the truth. Nobody in our family ever said out loud. They didn't leave you because you were strong. They called you strong so it would cost nothing to leave you. He asked for no money. He asked for no meeting. The last line said, "You don't owe me an answer. I just got tired of you not knowing the truth." I was still holding the letter when my phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Dana with a link and no words except, "Faith. You need to see this. Now." Before I clicked Dana's link, my phone rang, and it was Ro again, calling like she'd felt a storm coming through the floorboards. I told her about Caleb's letter, and she was quiet. And then she told me the story I'd never been told, the one that doesn't excuse a single thing but explains the machine. My mother was 16 in the winter of 1984 when my grandmother pulled her out of school. Not asked. Pulled. Carol was the strong one, see? Good with her hands. And her baby brother had the lungs, the one they lit candles for. So Carol went to work steam-pressing sheets at the laundry on Route 9, 5 days a week at 16, and her paychecks went home in an envelope she wasn't allowed to open, and nobody ever called it a sacrifice, because in that house it was just the shape of things. She never got her diploma. The brother got well and got a diploma and got a life. And Ro told me the sentence their mother used to say standing at the stove. The family catechism handed down like a cast-iron pan. Strong ones don't get saved. They do the saving. I sat with the phone against my ear and my eyes shut. And for a minute I could see her, 16 years old in a hot laundry, learning that love in our family flows one direction, from the strong to the saved. And if you're strong, you'd best not need anything. Your mama wasn't born a wolf, Faithy, Ro said. She was raised by Winters. I understood the machine then, and understanding it didn't mean I had to keep feeding it my hands. Then I hung up, and I clicked the link. It was a GoFundMe page, launched that morning, and the title was, "Help Dale Fight for His Heart," with a heart emoji, and the photo was my dad in a hospital gown looking small, and I truly believe he didn't know it was being taken. The goal was set at a number close to the surgery estimate, and 11 people had already donated. But the campaign text was the payload, and my mother had written it herself. I'd know the voice anywhere. It walked through Dale's diagnosis, his faith, his humility, and then it turned the corner into me. While our estranged daughter, a Columbus millionaire, has turned her back on the family that raised her, we trust the Lord to provide what she will not. My town read that. The church ladies who'd taught me Vacation Bible School read it and shared it. And the pastor's wife down in Tennessee shared it with a prayer hands emoji, and by evening it was on the Maple Glen community page above a bake sale announcement. My office phone started ringing with numbers I didn't know. A client of 9 years called Dana to ask, gently, if everything was all right with me, because somebody had emailed the link to his office manager. Here's what I want you to notice. I had not refused anything. No one had ever formally asked me for a dime before that folder hit my conference table days earlier, and I'd said I needed time to think. The refusal was written for me in advance, the way the note had been written for me in advance, because in my mother's stories, my part is always already typed. And I'll be honest with you, because this channel is where I get to be. My hands shook when I read it. If someone has ever rewritten your story to make themselves the victim of it, then you know exactly what that shaking is, and I'd ask you to hit subscribe and stay with me, because what I signed 2 days later I can never unsign, and I want you there when I sign it. That night I didn't post a reply. I didn't comment. I wrote one name on the notepad by my stove. Colleen Barrett. They came back to my lobby 2 days later, and this time my mother brought a wheelchair. Rented, as it turned out, because my father walked into the building on his cane and sat down into that chair in my parking lot. I know because my camera at the entrance caught it, and I have never decided which was sadder, that she staged it or that he let her. It was a Thursday, 10:15 in the morning, and I was mid-walkthrough with the operations team from a regional clinic group, the biggest contract Brightline had ever been up for. My mother wheeled my father through my front doors and raised her voice to fill the room. 12 years, and she won't even help her dying father. My schedulers froze at their desks. The clinic people looked at their shoes. My father stared at the floor like a man trying to sink through it, and his hands, I'll never forget this, his hands were squeezing the armrests white. A passenger in a car aimed at his own daughter. I did not argue with my mother in front of my staff. I walked over, quiet, and I said, "Let's get Dad some air." And I wheeled him out myself, with her trailing us performing grief at the windows. In the parking lot, my father grabbed my wrist. He didn't say anything. He just shook his head, slow, 2 or 3 times, eyes wet, mouth working, and that was the whole message, like a man signaling from inside a locked house. I put them in their car. Before I shut her door, I leaned down and told my mother one true thing. The next letter you get from me won't be from me. The clinic group emailed that afternoon to postpone. Family stuff, they said. They understood completely. I'd like to tell you I marched straight to a lawyer, but the truth is, I went to 2 appointments that week, and the first one was in a small office with a ficus and a woman named Dr. Marsh, who I'd been seeing, off and on, for 2 years without ever telling her the whole storage unit story. That Thursday, I told her all of it. The ER at 19, the intake form, the little box where I wrote NA. And Dr. Marsh, who does not waste words, asked me one question. Who taught you that needing help is how you get left? I opened my mouth to answer it and heard what came out. It had cost them nothing to leave me, I said. That was the point of making me strong. And she let that sit between us. And then she pointed one finger, gently, at the Brightline logo on my jacket. A bright line is a boundary, Faith. You've been drawing them for everybody but yourself. The second appointment the next morning was with Colleen Barrett, a family attorney with a handshake like a door closing, and she listened to the whole thing, the lobby scenes, the fundraiser, the pre-filled mortgage papers, and she didn't gasp either. She said this was Tuesday for her. We drafted a cease and desist that afternoon. No contact by phone or in person, no appearances at my place of business. Removal of the false statements published about me, or we proceed to a civil stalking protection order, which Ohio grants for exactly this pattern. It's 3 pages. It's polite. It's a legal document asking my own mother to stop. Colleen turned it around on her desk and set a pen on it, and nobody warns you about this part. Nobody tells you your hand shakes. I want to be honest about what that signature was, because it gets sold as empowerment. And it is, but that's not what it feels like in the chair. As long as that line stayed empty, I was still, In some closed wing of myself, a daughter waiting on an apology, keeping a place set, keeping a unit paid up, keeping the porch light of it on. Signing meant the waiting was over. On paper. On purpose. In front of a notary. The girl who watched the road for their truck died on that line, and I'm the one who put her down. I signed it. Colleen sent it certified mail the same day, and she reported the fundraiser, which came down that weekend, because naming a private person as the villain of your campaign, with claims nobody can support, and a name you never got permission to use, violates the platform's own rules, and platforms enforce rules faster than families do. And then, my bloodline lit up like a switchboard. My uncle left a voicemail I kept for the tone alone, the word lawyer pronounced like a curse word. 2 cousins texted the same sentence a day apart, "She's your mother," capital letters and all, as if that word were a bill I'd left unpaid. Nobody asked what she'd done. The verdict never requires my testimony. Within a week it was quiet enough to hear what I'd actually lost, which was the last soft illusion that any of them would ever choose me over the story. One person from that side didn't scold me. My Aunt Rose sent a text that said, "I'll set a table if you two ever want neutral ground." And then, my mother's last voicemail arrived. No tears in this one. That's how I knew it was really her. The voice was level and cold and almost restful, like she'd finally taken off a coat that didn't fit. "We didn't abandon you, Faith Ann. We left you room to become this. Sunday. Your aunt's kitchen. Come let your father look at you once before his surgery. Or don't. And live with it." Then the click. Dana listened to it twice with her jaw set and said, "Don't you dare. That kitchen is an ambush with casserole." Dr. Marsh didn't tell me to go or stay. She asked one question, the way she does. "What would you need to say in that kitchen so that 10 years from now, the memory belongs to you and not to her?" I knew the answer by the time I got to my truck. I spent the next 2 days on the phone with the billing office of a hospital in Tennessee and made one visit to my bank. And what came out of both went into a plain envelope in my coat pocket. And no, I'm not telling you yet what was in it. Then I texted my brother for the first time in 12 years. "I'll be at Rose on Sunday. You should be there." My mother wanted an audience for this. Fine. I was done playing the strong one for them. I was going to be something scarier. Clear. Rose's kitchen smelled like every holiday of my childhood. Coffee kept too long on the burner and a green bean casserole breathing under foil, and the tablecloth had little embroidered strawberries. And it occurred to me while I hung my coat on the peg that I was about to have the most important conversation of my life under a wall clock shaped like a rooster. My mother had arrived early and set the stage. She'd brought Pastor Wheeler from her old congregation, a decent man with nervous hands who had no idea what he'd been drafted into. Only that Sister Carol needed witnesses to a family healing. And that's the thing to understand about my mother. She has never once in her life performed to an empty house. My father sat at the head of the table, thin as a fence post in a collared shirt that used to fit him, and when I came in, his whole face moved, and he pressed his lips together to keep it in whatever cage he keeps it in. Rose stood at the stove and never fully sat down the entire afternoon, a referee in an apron. And then the storm door hissed, and my brother walked in, and my mother's face did something I'd waited 29 years to see. It slipped. "Caleb," she said, "you didn't need to drive up." He hung his jacket next to mine, work boots, gray at the temples now. 7 years of sober living lived into the lines of him, and he said, "Quiet. I think I did, Mom." She recovered fast. She always does. And out came the photo album, laid on the strawberry tablecloth like an exhibit, and she started turning pages of birthdays and Easters, narrating us back into a family. Except every page after 2014 was Caleb, Tennessee, Christmas without me, and she turned those pages faster. Then she folded her hands and looked around the table like calling a meeting to order. "We are not leaving this table," my mother said, "until we are a family again." And then, credit where due, she laid the deal out with the clarity of a woman who has been drafting it for weeks. Faith withdraws that hateful lawyer letter. Faith helps with the surgery. Family helps family. Faith signs on the little house 2 streets over. Just her name. Just for the bank. And she actually opened her hands like a preacher at the benediction. All this ugliness disappears. And you're our daughter again. Fully. Like the 12 years were a billing dispute we could settle out of court. Pastor Wheeler cleared his throat and offered that Scripture asks us to honor father and mother, and I let that hang unanswered, because I've read the whole verse, and there's instructions in that book for fathers too, about not provoking your children, but I hadn't come to trade Bible. I looked down the table at my father. Dad. Is this what you want? He opened his mouth. My mother started to answer for him, the way she'd answered for him for 40 years, and then something happened that was not in her script. Dale Twyford put his hand flat on the strawberry tablecloth and said, I wanted to go back for you. The first night. I sat in the truck. In the driveway of the new place. Keys in it. The kitchen went so quiet I could hear the rooster clock. My mother's hand jerked and knocked her coffee sideways, a brown flood spreading toward the album. And she didn't reach for it, Ro did. And my mother sat there with her hands trembling, and for the first time since I walked in, she wasn't performing. Nobody sat in any truck for me, she said, low, and her eyes were somewhere in 1984. I was 16. They took me out of school and nobody drove back, and you all got saved anyway, didn't you? Strong ones don't get saved, Faith. They do the saving. For one breath, I looked at my mother and saw a girl in a hot laundry on Route 9, and I almost reached for her hand. Then she straightened her spine, patted her hair, and said the price out loud again. So we're agreed, sweetheart, my mother said, dabbing at the spilled coffee's edge with a napkin, composed again, the machine back online. Family looks forward, and I heard myself start to talk, and my voice came out the way it comes out on job sites when a ceiling is about to give, low and slow and level. I said, I want to tell this table where I slept. And I did. I told them about Unit 118, 10 feet by 10 feet, the brown couch with the burn hole, the army blanket a stranger left me because strangers were the only adults checking on me that year. I told them about the 7 a.m. rule and the gate code and the coffee can where I keep the note, and about writing NA in the emergency contact box at 19 with my appendix on fire, and I watched Pastor Wheeler's face go from polite to gray because he'd been told he was coming to witness a healing, and he was, just not the one she'd cast. My mother said, Faith, that's ancient. And I said, I'm not finished, Mom. Still quiet. And she stopped, because quiet was the one voice she'd never heard me use. Then I took the envelope out of my coat pocket and set it on the strawberry tablecloth, and I slid it past her, to my father. Inside was a payment confirmation from the hospital's billing office in Tennessee, arranged over 2 days on the phone and confirmed in writing. The surgery, the surgeon, the stay, the rehab after, paid in full, directly to the hospital, sole beneficiary Dale Twyford. Not a check with my mother's name anywhere near it. Dad gets his heart fixed, I said. Every cent. Already done. And none of it touches your hands, Mom. This isn't me paying a family debt. There's no debt. This is just the difference between us. I don't leave people on the side of the road. My mother reached for the envelope, and my father, for the first time in my whole life, moved faster than her. And the letter stands, I said. No calls, no lobby visits, no mortgage. You'll figure it out. The words landed on her exactly as intended. Her own words. Returned to sender after 12 years. She said my name once. I said, I did figure it out, Mom. That was never the question. The question was why a 17-year-old had to, and I've stopped asking you to answer it. She came up out of that chair like the table had caught fire, and the crying was gone, you understand. This was the bare wire at last, my mother with her fingers shaking across the casserole, hollering that I had proved it in front of God and the pastor. You don't need anybody. You never did. Even as a baby you didn't. And there it was, served up in her own voice, the whole engine of my childhood, out loud at last. She'd built a daughter who needed nothing, and then presented the not needing as evidence, verdict, and alibi. all three. Needing nobody was your gift to me, Mom, I said, and I stood up and pushed in my chair, because Ro raised me right for at least a few Novembers. I'm giving it back. She said if I walked out that door I was no daughter of hers, and the rooster clock ticked, and I looked at her. And the terrible mercy of it was that the sentence had no teeth left. She'd repossessed the title 12 years ago. There was nothing left on that lot to take. I'm done being the saving mom, I said from the doorway, quiet as snow. I'm going home to be the saved. I kissed Ro's cheek at the stove, and she gripped my hand hard, and I put my palm flat on my father's shoulder for a second, and he covered it with his. And that was the whole conversation, and it was enough, and it was everything he had. Behind me, my mother was telling Pastor Wheeler what he'd just seen. He didn't seem convinced. I was 2 steps down the porch when the storm door hissed, and it was Caleb, jacket in his hand, not chasing me exactly, just standing there the way you stand at a door you spent 7 years learning to walk through. Unit 118, he said. Is it still yours? Until the end of the year, I said. He nodded, looked at his boots, looked up. Would you let me help you empty it? I studied my brother's face, the man who wrote the note and the only one who ever owned a word of it. Bring gloves, I said. The surgery was in March, at the hospital in Tennessee, and it went clean. New valve, strong rhythm, a surgeon who called Dale a lucky man with good timing. I know because the billing office confirmed the account settled, and because in April, a card came to my office in my father's handwriting, shaky block letters, just a few lines. Paid the nurses a compliment about my daughter. They said she must be something. Thank you. Dad. I keep it in my desk drawer, and some weeks I don't open the drawer at all, and some weeks I do. My mother honored the letter, which is to say her lawyer's eye view of the world finally worked in my favor. No calls, no appearances, silence with a certified male spine. Ro reports that the Tennessee version of the story has me played by a colder actress, and I've made my peace with that, because you can't sue a bedtime story, and my mother needs hers to sleep. The clinic group called back in May, after their office manager did her own reading, and Brightline got the contract, the biggest in our history, and my crews earned every inch of it. Therapy continues. Some Tuesdays we talk about boundaries like they're finished carpentry, and some Tuesdays my hand still remembers the shake of that pen, and Dr. Marsh says, both of those are true at once, and that's the job. Dana framed the Business Journal article for the break room, and underneath it she taped a label she printed herself. Founder, age 17. First office pictured below, next to a photo she made me pose for outside Unit 118, arms crossed, almost smiling. My employees think it's a joke about humble beginnings. Dana knows it's a deed. And in May, on a bright Saturday, my brother drove up from Tennessee with work gloves in his back pocket. There wasn't much left to carry, which was the point. The carrying was ceremonial. Caleb and I hauled the lawn chair out into the sun, and he stood in the empty 10x10 for a while with his hands in his pockets, doing the same arithmetic Earl once did in that doorway, and I let him do it. Earl passed 2 years ago. His nephew runs the place now, and when I told him we were finally clearing out, he waived the last month's fee, said his uncle would have wanted it, said Earl used to call me the tenant who paid like clockwork for an empty room, and never once asked why. At the end, there was just the Folgers can. I took out the note and unfolded it on my palm, one short line in my brother's tilted hand, and Caleb said, "Rough. I can shred it. It's mine to shred." And I shook my head, and I folded it back up small, and I handed him the postcard instead. The one with the stamp she spent to say it twice. "One for each of us," I said. "So we remember what we walked out of." He put it in his shirt pocket and pressed his hand flat over it like a man taking a pledge. Then I turned in the brass key I'd carried for 12 years, and Unit 118 clicked shut behind us for the last time. And that November there was one more folding chair at the break room table, and Dana raised her cup of apple cider and said, "To family, the kind you build." Here is the one thing I know now that I didn't know at 17. It costs nothing to leave the strong one behind, but it costs something to stay. And that cost is how you know it's love. That's my story. One note on a kitchen counter. One brass key I carried for 12 years. One Sunday when I finally stopped asking why. If you've been the one who had to figure it out alone, take this as your sign. Build the table and choose who sits at it. Share this with someone who needs it today. Drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.